everyone. It's Megan Ramos, and I'm here with my wonderful co-host, Dr. Nadia Pataguana, for episode 17, where we're interviewing an expert guest. In today's episode, we're very fortunate to have two special people joining us. We have our very own Coach Larry Diamond, one of our fasting method expert coaches and researchers, and along with his wife, Lynne Diamond, who also helps us in the community by co-facilitating our weekly cooking demos. Nadia, how are you doing today?
I'm good, Megan. How are you?
I'm good. It's a bit of a strange recording day for us. It's late for you. It's middle of the day for me. I've got wet hair. It's
Well, we do what we can to get such special people on anytime, any day of the week.
And we're changing things up a little bit today from our Q&A episodes. We've had a lot of those lately, so it's definitely time to bring in an expert. And I can't think of a greater expert to join us today. We've got so many incredible people on our fasting method team. So we'd love to introduce Coach Larry and his lovely wife, Lynne. Hey guys, how are you doing today?
Doing well. Thanks for having us.
We are doing really well. It's Sunday afternoon for us, and thank you guys for coordinating 3 different time zones and work schedules and
family schedules.
Yeah, we really appreciate being part of TFM. It's an unbelievable community.
So funny because we were talking about, going through the background before we started to record the session today. And we were talking about when you joined the fasting method, and you mentioned that you started doing some onboarding with us in 2018. And I feel like I've known you and Lynne my entire life, and that you've been part of the fasting method since the very start. I guess an unofficial part of our team, but still part of our fasting method family. And I can't think of 3 other people I would love to spend a Sunday afternoon with. So thank you so much for joining us today. So Larry and Lynne, you have an incredible journey. Some of our listeners might be familiar with it because it's so inspiring. Everybody wants to tell it. But let me throw it over to you to let our listeners know how you got to this place.
Sure. I'll start because in real life, I started a little before my wife. The journey has been extraordinary. Sometimes I need to pinch myself. And whenever I see Lynne and her vibrancy, it's been certainly 1,000 miles in a positive direction. So I'll go back to 2013. I was 47, about to turn 48. And we had recently adopted our daughter. She was 2 at the time. My uncle, who was my father figure growing up, was living with us with, unfortunately, Alzheimer's. And I remember a dinner that we had after visiting a zoo, and we were eating about 10 minutes after, and he didn't remember just being at the zoo. And it, ironically, was at an Italian restaurant with pasta. But I had this epiphany. I was looking at Lynne, looking at my uncle, looking at Piper, that I didn't feel that I was going to make 50 because I was morbidly obese for over 20 years, between 270 and 350. But in addition to the morbid obesity, I had severe IBS, sleep apnea, exercise-induced asthma, joint pain, skin conditions, depression, leaky brain, no energy. The list goes on. And I was getting to the point where I couldn't even walk to the corner. It was getting hard for me to breathe most days. I was in really, really bad shape. But somehow also my intuition was saying it was solvable, that all of these conditions were interrelated. And at their root, they were what I was doing on a daily basis, most frequently with my diet. And the foods I was choosing, I was constantly hungry. So I was eating around the clock. I felt, even though I was 290 pounds, that I didn't know what my body fat was for because I didn't feel that I could access it. So I am a scientist. I started as a chemical engineer, then molecular biology, but my degrees are in geography. So I'm endlessly fascinated with how our bodies work, how we work. And in geography, we look at the interactions between cultures, traditional cultures and modern cultures, and how diet and food fundamentally shapes the health of the populations. So I tapped into that. I tapped into that diet was going to be foundational for me to survive and eventually thrive. And I just went all into the internet. And I focused at that time on the paleo community because they were really asking these same questions. What's gone wrong? Where have we gone wrong? Humans used to be healthy and they're not. What if it's all these processed foods, different fats that no one has ever eaten? What if that's promoting insulin resistance, chronic inflammation, inflamed and leaky guts, and bad mitochondrial health? So as a researcher, there's kind of those four things that I think most people, when they come to the fasting method, have, because modern diets and snacking are too big of a mismatch from what our bodies need to express their health potential. So that was the start of my journey. Why am I hungry all the time? Why am I inflamed? Why is my energy so low? Doctors that I saw had no clue. They never, even though I had all 5 markers of metabolic syndrome, HDL in the 20s, triglycerides in the 200s, high blood pressure, I was never told what I had. Rather, I was literally told that I had gluttony and sloth. So I had to become my own advocate and my own researcher to solve the chronic constant hunger and insulin resistance, hormonal problems, poor gut health. So that was the start of my journey. I call it suffering was solution. I was suffering so much on a daily basis. And as I've heard you, Megan, say, most of your successful clients in the clinic were sick and tired of being sick and tired. And that was really the start of my journey.
Thanks so much, Larry. And as usual, Megan knows I'm full of questions for you guys, but I'll try to take it easy on you. Lynne, we still want to hear a little bit from you, if that's okay, before we start with the questions. And I just wanted to apologize to our friends and listeners listening in today. It is Sunday for all 3 of us. And so there's a lot going on in our houses. So you may hear a little bit more noise than usual in the background. We apologize for that, but bear with us today. Okay. So Lynne, can we hear a little bit about your story as well before we start drilling you with some questions?
Sure. Okay. So like Larry said, so he began first. He had this idea that diet was contributing, especially, he mentioned his uncle, and that his uncle, we found out, recently before we started our journey, that he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so he just saw himself going down the same path, and he started the journey. And at first I thought, it's another diet. It's another thing that we're going to do. He's going to do it for a couple months and then we'll be right back to where we were. We had done this before. We had done individually. We had both become like vegetarian at different times in our life. We went back to that. We had both tried moving more. We had like a room where like exercise equipment just died up there. It just wasn't used. It was great for clothes. So I was like, okay, you do it, you do you. And he volunteered to cook. So, I'm an elementary school teacher. We were also taking care of his uncle. So I was mainly taking care of Stu. And so he started cooking. So at home, he was doing all the cooking. He said, by the way, we eat out. A couple of weeks later, corn out. I was a little testy about that, but I said, okay. And so I continue to eat the same way at work and out with friends. And what I noticed about 6 months on was that he had stuck. He was happier. He had begun dropping some weight and he had more energy. And I was starting to be intrigued. I was like, okay, well, we might have something here. So I decided to take those changes and take them to the workplace with me as well. So I stopped going out and getting fast food for lunch. I stopped eating corn chips out with my friends after work and made those changes. And he talks about the different health issues that he had. I had lots of joint pain. I had rosacea, psoriasis. I was on a CPAP as well, depression, anxiety. And I had suffered from all of those for years. Was on medication for depression and anxiety. And so once I made those changes, the biggest change first was the joint pain. Once I took out, it was mainly corn, I took that out and I was able to walk up the stairs without my knees hurting. I was able to sleep through the night without my hips. I'd wake up in the middle of the night because I had to shift because my hips hurt. And all of that resolved itself. And so so I started making those little changes big changes really, but just cumulatively, I started seeing lots of amazing things happen. And so I was about 4 months in, I guess, and I had to have major surgery. And the doctor told me, basically for 2 months, you can't really exercise or do anything. And I had already started getting momentum and was a little bummed out about that, but continued doing all the same dietary things. And even after 2 months of really no walking, no physical activity, I dropped another 20 pounds just due to our nutrition changes. So, and I never stopped. And 70 pounds later, my psoriasis corrected itself. Like I said, no joint pain. I'm off all anxiety and depression meds. And so just haven't looked back, I guess.
I realize we didn't talk about the diet changes, but I announced one day to Kaylin, I'm never buying bread and pasta again. And I know Ken Berry talked about this. I went into the pantry. We did have seed oils. I can't believe it. We had the big corn oils and stuff. And I kind of took them and dunked it into our trash can. But I guess we can, talk a little bit more about that. And of course, fasting did become a huge part of the healing.
Thank you both so much for sharing your journeys. It's a lot. But unfortunately, for so many people nowadays, that is the story of their family, just these chronic progressive conditions. And, something that you said, Larry, about, mine and observations, people are sick and tired of being sick and tired. And they're realizing that traditional medical strategies in Western medicine just aren't doing it. And everybody wants a quick and easy solution, right? So traditional medicine often points to pills for that. But those pills end up causing all kinds of other side effects and other health problems. But to Kaylin, something as removing corn from her diet was literally like a miracle in terms of reducing her pain and giving her back her freedom. It's truly remarkable. Thank you so much for sharing.
You're more than welcome. It is absolutely amazing. And I think about what Dr. Fung says often. If you're suffering from a lifestyle and diet-related disease, then, there's limited help, as you mentioned, from modern medicine. But there's amazing life-changing help from successfully navigating diet and lifestyle changes.
Well, and as promised, I have a few questions for you guys because people listening in, and especially people who've had a chance to maybe watch, listen, and view some of your pictures, your befores and afters, they're going to be pretty amazed. And as you mentioned, you've been doing this since 2013. So not only did you manage to lose all that weight and reverse all those health conditions? You've managed to sustain that, which is really, really important. But if you don't mind, guys, let me dig a little deeper into the dietary part of it. I've heard you, Larry, mention that you started out with some type of an elimination diet, and I'm a big fan of elimination diets as a starting point. So I'd love to hear a little bit about that. And Kaylin, the very interesting thing that you just said, I come from a culture where people eat a lot of corn as their staple food. So in Mozambique, my people, their staple food is actually corn. It's a corn-based pap that they have with their curries and whatnot. So to hear you say this, I think is key, because still a lot of people view corn as a real food, a healthy type of food. So I'd like to talk a little bit about those things with you guys, your dietary changes. If you could be a little bit more specific and just tell us, like, what did you actually eliminate, Larry, and what did you do and are still doing from a diet perspective?
Absolutely. It was interesting in 2013, once I felt that I was worth healing, finding my whys. I think about, why did I heal? And part of it was actually feeling that I was worth it. I had a young wife, and as I mentioned, a 2-year-old daughter. And I've heard this term, when the student is ready, the teacher appears. So Dr. Perlmutter appeared, all these Professor Noakes, who we had the pleasure of interviewing for our members in TFN, one of the highlights of my life. And I literally announced one day, all these ideas were percolating. And I also remember my mind going, my grandmother had passed from type 2 diabetes in her 60s, in the early 70s. And I did have the thought, what if my uncle's Alzheimer's was a form of diabetes? What if it is the carbs? I had all these things resonating. So one day, and I don't think there was a shopping trip that I hadn't bought bread, but I came home and I announced to my wife, I never want to buy bread and pasta again. And yeah, and also I identified potato chips, candy, ice cream. Basically, I think I was resonating with my geography, that around the world, and there's reasons, I'd love to get in some of the details of why the corn in Mozambique is not the corn that my wife and I were eating in the US. I think that would really help our listeners. There's so many of these details, but around the world, very different types of diets, because they're, until modern times, constrained by location, right? There wasn't bananas available in Toronto at any time of the year, 0 times of the year, but certainly not in January and February. But the commonality was real food. So I was like, what can real food and real fats? And no culture ever feared fat. There was no fear of fat, and there was no fear of cholesterol. And people ate these real food diets. And the thing is that I love real fatty food, but I had bought in that fat was going to give me a heart attack and so forth. And I actually typed in, why is fat bad? And I came upon Ansel Keys, and that's how I found my first Professor Noakes video. And there was, I have the science background. It was all something called associational studies, which is the lowest form of studies. And I found out quickly that saturated fats are stable, healthy, and have been used in all the French culture, Asian cultures with coconut products, and all these cultures using saturated fat had the lowest heart disease. So I lost my fear of saturated fat, started embracing all these healthy, delicious, fatty foods that I could have. And I literally started with bacon and eggs at breakfast. And for the first time in decades, I could get to lunch without snacking and without any difficulty.
Okay, so Megan mentioned earlier that you're a researcher. So, without a doubt, you did a ton of research in figuring out what diet you were going to follow and probably trial and error throughout all these years. So, if you could summarize that, you've already mentioned that you eliminated a few things. So, carbs, want to tell us specifically which carbs? And then you mentioned healthy fats. And maybe you can give us some good examples for our listeners.
Yes. Well, I'll tell you what I did do, Nadia, which is so interesting. It's very close to your food rules. Let me say what I left in my diet. So I left in all types of meats, chicken, pork, beef, fish, all kinds of fish, all types of above ground vegetables. Through my research, I did find that I was insulin resistant, had hyperinsulinemia, and I was carb intolerant. So I really wanted to heal. So I've been able to bring back some higher carb real food. But at the time, I went very low carb and probably ketogenic. And with those above ground vegetables, I had them with plenty of extra virgin olive oil, butter at that time, ghee. And so the fats that I left in were the healthy, natural fats that humans have eaten for centuries or even longer, millennia. I took out all what are known as seed oils, all the fats that have come into the food supply in the last 150 years. So what my central paradigm was really the paleo paradigm. So looking at humanity both in the Paleolithic or what's known as the Neolithic or farming and pastoralist era. Long story short, my overall paradigm was the foods that we've eaten the longest, taking out the processed foods and customizing that evolutionary based approach with low carb because I was carb intolerant. So I took the best of paleo and the best of keto low carb. I did not use keto processed foods. I focused on all of the real foods and the healthy natural fats.
That sounds super similar to my story. I also got into this because I became interested in the paleo movement that was huge at the time. And luckily, it was something I was attracted to, and still people are very attracted to because it does have a lot of option. But basically, to summarize, Larry, it sounds very similar to what I did. So I also ended up going, at least during my healing part of my journey, very low carb, ketogenic, with only real foods. I didn't use any keto products, but it was basically all the meats and fish, all the above ground veggies. I did stay away from the root veggies and the fruit during that time of my journey. And then figuring out what all the healthy fats were. And like you mentioned, it was, the animal fats, the good olive oils and the avocado oils and the coconut oils and the butter and ghee. I mean, all these really yummy things, which really made the vegetables even yummier, more nutritious to go with my side of meat or fish. So it was pretty simple. And I think to this day, that's the message that I like to send to people. This is supposed to be simple. I did hear you say that now, and you've been in maintenance mode for a few years now, as I have, with some ups and downs. We'll leave that for another time. But I am more carb tolerant as you guys are. And so over time, and Megan as well, we have added in some smarter, healthier carbs, whatever you want to call them, right? A little bit more root vegetables and so on and so forth. So that's really, really great. Thanks, guys, for giving us a bit of a summary of what your diet looks like. I know Megan has some fasting questions for you.
Well, Larry noted that as he started to get more into this paleo, real whole food based lifestyle, that he found himself fasting naturally. So I'm curious, Larry, about the evolution of that. When did you realize that you're in fasting naturally? How did you feel about it? And then, what really led you to jump into doing intermittent fasting?
Absolutely. So, one of the interesting things about my journey was at the end of my first month, having made these pretty substantial dietary changes, and I was a work in progress. I had bread a couple times that first month, but I think by the fifth or sixth week, that was like my last gluten, and that was over 8 years ago. But interestingly enough, with all these big changes, I only lost 2 pounds my first month, but I did lose 100 pounds in a year. But I remember this talking to Lynne. After the first month, I was over the moon because it was the first time in my adult life that I ever remember not being hungry all the time. So at the end of that first month, not only was I less hungry, my mood was the best it had been in decades, and my energy was. So we call these in our community and other communities non-scale victories. So some people might be discouraged with a 2 pound weight loss. I was like almost jumping for joy because I already, and to this day, almost 9 years later, I could resonate with the quality of life upgrade, especially that my hunger had come into such a better place.
I used to think he was an
yeah.
emotional eater. I was like, "You're an emotional eater." And he's like, "No, I really just am really hungry all the time." And I was like, "I don't believe you. I think, or kind of a bored eater." But no, then he proved me wrong. Once, we started changing the quality of the food we ate, then it was just easier naturally. Like I was never a huge breakfast person. If I was, it was, the typical like dessert for breakfast if I had some. But then when I started making these changes, it was so much easier to wake up in the morning and not feel like I needed those carbs for breakfast. So that's kind of, and I think you kind of started feeling that way naturally. It was so much easier to do like intermediate fast just naturally.
But to give a picture of how far somebody can come, and I hear this all the time from clients and members, they're amazed at their hunger dropping with the fasting because of all these positive hormone changes. But for me, I did have breakfast. Then I was like famished at 9 or 10. Then I had lunch, famished again a couple hours later. And I remember coming home at 5 and saying, we have to go out and eat now because I was so hungry again. So I started with literally no carbs at breakfast, bacon and eggs, meat, sausage, leftover meat. And ironically, I loved that as a kid. So I was reconnecting. It didn't feel like deprivation. I don't know how I swiveled to the dessert for breakfast, but I went back to my roots and the foods that I love. So it did not feel like deprivation. And I could make it to lunch. And then I had, again, the veg and meat and healthy fats, leftovers often, simple. I had a rule, lunch had to take 5 minutes of prep or less. So I kept it very simple, like Nadia was saying, hard-boiled eggs, meat. I did keep dairy in, so cheeses, sometimes a quick salad. And then I could make it to dinner and make good choices. I wasn't famished for dinner. When our hunger's out of control, like we don't really think, it kind of the lizard brain takes over, but I could sit and think about my choices at dinner. So within that first month, I was able to eat 3 meals, maybe some 2 meal days within that first month. And then somewhere, I think within 2 months, I called it not eating because I'm not hungry. I don't know if I use the word fasting, but I just was having some 1 meal days and my mood shot up. I became even less hungry with the 1 meal days, not more hungry, because I was becoming more and more fat adapted and more in ketosis, feeling great, feeling energetic. I started about 3 or 4 months into the journey, a couch to 5K journey, something I always wanted to do. My Mount Everest was running a 5K because I had exercise induced asthma my whole life. So I was known as Cherry Diamond, so I could never run. I've subsequently found out from my research that saturated fat is necessary for good lung health. So it was just amazing. Kaylin often says that she never heard me complain, and I didn't. So I think I loved the food every day. I loved how I was feeling. And a lot of my 100-pound weight loss that first year and 120 total, I would say the bulk of it was 1 meal and 2 meal days with the dietary changes. That's what worked for us. I had not become type 2. I remember fasting longer and loving it. And I've done all types of protocols after that. But it really started with all this fantastic healing, going back as Nadia to a real food diet that I loved and loved me back. Totally changed insulin, of course, but leptin and inflammation. And it was such a natural way to bring time restricted eating and intermittent fasting into my life.
So we mentioned at the beginning of the show that you started with us the fasting method in 2018. But interestingly, I met you guys. I don't know about Megan, but I met you guys the same night that I met Terry, Coach Terry. And we just interviewed Terry not too long ago. And that was a very special night, Megan. The Breck evening that we were talking about with Terry at the Two Keto Dudes house in Breck. So I actually met you guys. I remember this like it was yesterday in 2016, I think. Was that 2016? It must have been.
Or
the beginning of 2017. Yeah. So we were at Low Carb Breck and you guys were coming in to the big house, the big party with your little girl. And I remember that she was there for the dinner and whatnot. At one point, it was time to put her down to sleep. I don't even know how old she was, but she's the same age as my oldest.
Yeah.
And you guys put her down on the couch. I remember this like it was yesterday. So you do everything as a family now that I've gotten to know you. And I know that there are some challenges there as well that people are probably listening in. And I definitely have shared, my challenges with my two girls who are insulin resistant. And so we're dealing with real food. How do you deal with deprivation versus real food and the real life out there and birthday parties and school? I mean, it's a big, big challenge. But I do know that you do this as a family. And I'd like to hear, maybe Lynne can tell us a little bit about how you guys do this as a family with your little girl, who's now, I believe, 11, right? Because that's how old mine is.
Yes.
Yeah.
So first of all, even before we started this journey, I just, as a parent, because I was raised this way, like we make one meal. Like I never made multiple things for Piper. She always, when she was eating adult food, she ate what we ate. And so that was easier in that fact that her palate had already experienced other foods that were not, she wasn't eating like just frozen chicken nuggets and just, Cheerios. So I think that was the first part. And then we just continued to do that. Whatever we ate, we introduced to her. As she got older and got the idea that she could say no to dinner, we were like, sure, no problem. You're welcome. You don't have to eat, but just know that there's nothing else until this gets eaten. I know some parents deal with that. Like, I'm just not going to eat. And we always say, okay, listen to your body, but this is what we have. And until this is eaten, nothing else will be had.
But I do think, to Nadia's point, that there was a really big difference between preschool. In the United States, preschool, at least the ones we went to, each child brings their own food. And then once she hit kindergarten, so you're in a school structure that almost every kid is eating the standard US kid diet, which is the refined carbs, the seed oils, that maybe small amounts of meat, but a highly, highly processed food diet that's very marketed well, neo colors. And that was Nadia, and we're still navigating this to this day. she was eating differently than all her peers because we found out, and we're so grateful that we found out, and we actually have the genetic testing. We all are non-celiac gluten sensitivity, and I wish we could share this with every parent because our daughter is named Piper. We called her Gluten Piper. Right at the start of our journey, at around 2 years old, she became a completely different human being with gluten. And so many parents don't know what can happen to some kids, not all kids, and they'll see specialist after specialist for a decade. So we did maintain the gluten-free. We've packed her lunch each time, but she has asked us, why can't I eat like everyone else? For sure.
My kids too. It's an ongoing, but the way I see it and the way I don't know how you guys see this and describe it, probably very similar. We're planting the seed, right? I mean, my kids are very knowledgeable. We're not perfect. I always say this, but it's true. They eat what we eat. We have all these, you don't have to like it. You just have to eat it. And when they do the whole, they don't want to eat business, it's okay too, right? I did at some point when they were little, you had this paranoia that if they didn't eat, they were going to die. And of course, no fasting for kids, but this is all about them eating when they're hungry. And if they're eating real foods, and they're more satisfied. So I think, Megan, we could probably do, even though we don't, we don't work with children at TFM, but this is a topic in and of itself. But it's one that we talk quite a bit about in our community because a lot of the moms are struggling with how to feed their families. They're making such wonderful changes in their own life. And it does trickle down to your kids. It's good examples of what to eat and
I think bringing them into, as they grow older, bringing them into the decision making as much as possible. So grocery shopping together, talking about, what you can have. And like you said, we don't obviously make her fast. She has a lot higher carb diet than we do. Yeah.
But it's real food carbs.
But it's real food carbs.
Right. And eliminating the grains is very helpful. Like my daughter has this whole grain reaction too. Like she's got the cough, and it's not that she doesn't have them. We go places, and I mean, it's the awareness, I think. My daughter, like yours at this age, is very aware. She's very aware that when she eats grains, that she gets very bloated, sometimes pain. There's that reflux. So anyway, this is an ongoing battle, I'm sure, for me and you, but it's very positive, I think, because they're getting a really good foundation.
And of course, we model the real food for sure. And Megan was in Austin for another conference, and we were at a barbecue. And you could see our daughter carrying her beef rib to the table. And before she got to the table, she was licking the beef rib. And she truly does have a love of real food. So we see
That's great.
We see that. And, and an attraction to, the processed food, but we don't have to force real food on her. And we get these shipments of something called imperfect food. And if we get certain veg, she'll as we're unpacking, she'll take it out and start eating it.
I find that my youngest is actually, because she was born into this, she came into our lives when we were already eating real food and whatnot. She is like Piper. She just grabs the rib by the bone and eats. So she's got naturally, whereas my oldest was exposed to a lot more. And we can't even talk about the processed food because it's such Frankenstein food that of course the kids are going to be attracted to it. And that's, again, we could go on forever. We do want to talk a little bit about what you guys are doing with the fasting method. So, Megan.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm laughing a little bit inside because, like I said at the start, it feels like Larry's just been around forever. I actually remember first being introduced to Larry and Kaylin by Jason. This was eons ago in the clinic. And Jason, I walked into his clinic room because I needed to ask him something about a patient. And once we're done chatting about that, he was on Twitter and he said, come here. And he said, have you followed this Larry Diamond guy? And I was like, him and his wife post some really interesting stuff. And he said, go follow Larry. I think he's someone that we need to keep a watch on. So from that moment, I started following Larry and Kaylin, and immediately felt like I was part of their family and they were part of our community. And so, Larry, I feel like I've known you most of my life, but I know you were working as an engineer in the state of Texas, and you were eager to have a more significant impact on people's lives and their health, and to really share everything you and Kaylin have learned, everything you guys are doing with your daughter at home. And I mean, Piper just thrives. Like when you're around Piper, oh my goodness, she is just such the brightest light. And you wanted to get that information out there. And I was so excited to hear that, because your philosophies and Kaylin's philosophies resonate so much with mine and Jason's, the whole TFM team. So we reached out, and after, chatting with you several times at many conferences, reached out, and we're eager to have you on our team. So Larry, why don't you take a few minutes to talk about what it is that you do at the fasting method and how Kayleen joins in all of the fun?
Absolutely. So as Megan mentioned earlier, I'm both a coach and a researcher for the fasting method. I have coaching clients, and TFM has this community, and the coaching clients are part of the community as well. So I do small group and one-on-one coaching. We have these tremendous coaching packages where people get weekly help. They're 6 months programs. For the first 3 months, we're meeting weekly to implement coaching, to customize a coaching plan, to customize an eating plan, to really give fasting and eating best practices. Movement, stress reduction, sleep strategies also come up, and accountability. And I would say, you've probably experienced this, Nadia and Megan. Coaching clients become friends. You get to know them. And it's such a joy to see people make, we call it a growth mindset, an optimistic, people like me and Kaylin that were always hungry. When you see them not snacking, that's often the starting point, not snacking. They're like, Coach Larry, yeah, I had a whole week. I only snacked once. I'm not going to say it's perfect. And they're like, it was amazing. I can't believe it. And then I skipped breakfast. And then I only had one meal. And to help them on this journey, hear from them how it's becoming a new normal, and all these weight loss, but also non-scale victories, similar to me and my wife, better mood, skin clearing up, more energy. I had a gentleman, I have coaching on Sundays. He just invested in a Peloton because he's feeling so great. Another client was at the start of her journey. She had that non-snacking week. So it's just such a joy to help people. I always say in Kaylin and I's story, she did all the work. She had to connect with her whys. She had to decide and actually implement, apply the recommendations that I was giving to her. And she asked so many whys. Why no corn? Which we can
That was a big one.
we can come back to Nadia. So that's the coaching side. There's also the community side, and our coaching clients have full access to all the community features. So the community is remarkable. We coach Nadia, Megan, do live meetings each week. I do. Coach Terry, Coach John, Coach Lisa, Coach Andrea Lombardi. So we have over 30 live meetings a week on eating strategies, of course, fasting strategies, class meetings on weight loss, women in fasting, successful habit changes. Our community loves this. They are so enthusiastic. We also have an incredibly active forum that Nadia's in, and daily it seems like Megan is, I am, and there's such great sharing and support and camaraderie in the forum. There's a fasting challenge each week hosted by Megan with videos each week from Megan and Dr. Fung. There's a healthy habit change. There's live streams. There's fasting courses, dietary courses, and the support and the finding a place where everyone is making these fasting and dietary changes, where that's the common and the normal, changes people's lives. To find this community where people are struggling and overcoming similar things is just life-changing for so many people.
One thing is for sure is that our TFM team is pretty obsessed with our community. We are in there daily. It's really very useful for us to be part of that community. Of course, helping people, it's clear in your tone. I have actually never met anyone more passionate about this than you, Larry. This is definitely if I could just summarize it very quickly, but our community is pretty amazing. The people are amazing. And it's even for myself, I am a member of the community. That's why I'm in there so much. And I know you are too.
I think we learned so much. And the one thing that unites all of us at the fasting method is that we are lifelong learners and we don't get stuck in one lane. We're constantly learning. And how we've learned through our own journeys, we've learned through working with patients and different clients. And then the community enables us to really sort of turbocharge that learning by having so many wonderful interactions. And it's really great. And I learned so much from all of the team. The feedback that you're giving, the suggestions, I think it's a great way for even us on the fasting method to continue to learn from each other on a daily basis. Well, Larry and Caitlin, thank you so much for joining us today. Now, something Nadia and I are going to start asking our expert guests to do is to share their top tip for fasting, nutrition, getting started. What is your number one tip? Both of you.
Eat real food with a positive mindset that you can change your palate, change your sweet tooth, this growth mindset that we're under no obligation to be the same person today that we were yesterday, that you can create. We might not have, I know my mom didn't cook. I mentioned my grandmother passing from type 2 and my uncle, unfortunately, getting Alzheimer's. So I may not have come from a background with healthy habit and real food, but that is now our reality. This growth mindset that you can find a way of eating you love that loves you back. We've never enjoyed food more, and you create a new normal, new habits. Eating real food makes fasting so much easier and more effective. But I really resonate with Coach Terry and the growth mindset.
You can do hard things. Yeah, you can do hard things. And he stole mine. Eat nutrient-dense food. I think if you start there, if you just start with nutrient-dense foods, and maybe not even talk about what you have to take out, but just increase more of the nutrient-dense foods, and then you'll be amazed at how the other stuff gets kind of crowded out naturally.
And one thing, Nadia mentioned this, I think kids hated veggies growing up because we feared fat. So steamed broccoli versus broccoli with salt, drenched in butter and maybe some bacon on it, entirely different things. So along with the eat real food, embracing these natural fats and just everything, we start working better as human beings.
This has been awesome. Thank you, guys.
You're very welcome. Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much. Lots of takeaways, especially for this lady who doesn't have kids yet. But I really enjoyed listening to you guys talk about that as well. And on the nutrient-dense food things, to all those women out there that are trying to be mamas, I really want you to take Kaylin and Larry's advice to heart here, because it's actually astounding how your diet 90 days before you conceive affects your child's DNA and their genes and their entire future. So from this hopeful to be mama one day who's filling up on all of the choline and fatty acids and everything that she can, I think that's great advice for everybody, regardless of where you are in your journey, especially for those mamas to be out there. Well, thank you again for joining us, and we will be back next week with another Q&A episode. So if you've got questions, let us know. You can email them into podcast@thefastlane.com. And to learn more about Larry and Caitlin, head over to thefastlane.com. Bye for now, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.